Can it be that they are mad themselves who call me mad? If you only knew what was going on in this head of mine.
You'd really know when Peter Lorre was in a film, you'd know you were going to be frightened.
Nice work. Neat, very neat.
I thought he was one of the greatest actors I'd ever seen.
I'm not a liar, but you are a coward. You don't want to hear the truth.
You'll always remember the eyes. They used to look at you as much as say, I'm going right into your soul.
He's one of the best character actors who ever worked in Hollywood or anywhere else.
His bulging eyes, nasal voice, and convincing renderings of tormented characters forever branded Peter Lorre as the master of menace, the sultan of sinister. In reality, he was a kind, sensitive, cultured man who spent most of his life trying to escape from the shadow of his macabre portrayals. Peter Lorre was born Ladislav Lowenstein on June 26, 1904, in Rosehéy, Hungary. The eldest of 5 children, he learned early in life how to deal with adversity.
Peter's father, Alois, was a staunch monarchist with a military background. He worked as a manager of a textile concern in Hungary. Peter's mother, Elvira, from whom he inherited his expressive eyes, unfortunately died when Peter was 4. She died of blood poisoning.
Now raising 4 children alone, Alois soon remarried and moved his family to Vienna, Austria, just as war broke out in the Balkans in 1913. Although disinterested in academics, Ladislav loved to paint and read stories about America. School did, however, offer him and his younger brother Francis their first stage experience.
My father and he were in some sort of Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs or something when they were still in primary school, so obviously he showed his talents early.
Upon graduation, the young actor finally made public what he had known privately for years, that he wanted to become an actor. Unhappy with his son's choice, Ladislav's conservative father pleaded with him to learn a trade, one that could earn him a decent living. Striking a deal, Ladislav agreed to work as a bank teller by day and pursue his acting at night. But the double life soon exhausted the frustrated actor, and he was fired from the bank. Realizing the depth of his son's commitment, Alois finally gave his blessing and allowed Ladislav to immerse himself in the bohemian lifestyle of the early 1920s.
He basically lived from cafe to cafe where he could scrounge a cup of coffee, read a newspaper, talk shop.
Now 20, the struggling actor joined an experimental theater group whose inspiration came from the teachings of Vienna's leading psychiatrist, Sigmund Freud. In their performances, the troupe explored the psychotherapeutic effects of drama, concepts that suited the introspective and analytical Lowenstein perfectly. Using his large, expressive eyes to project every kind of emotion, Ladislav was immediately respected as a gifted and believable actor.
And in one performance, Lorre played a murderer, a knife-wielding murderer who chased a prostitute around the stage. Well, he was so convincing that the people in the audience started yelling at him to stop it, stop it.
Early success encouraged the young actor to seek out bigger and brighter opportunities. In 1925, at the suggestion of a friend, 21-year-old Ladislav Lowenstein moved to Berlin and took the stage name Peter Lorre. Rising from the ashes of post-war Germany, Berlin had become an artistic mecca. Here, the decadent, the dazzling, and the deviant were all equally at home. So too was Peter Lorre.
Lorre came of age theatrically in Germany during the 1920s, where Expressionism had a tremendous impact on all the art forms, especially on the theater. And one of the hallmarks of Expressionism is the externalization of interior mental states. It's very, it's analytical. Lorre often said that he thought acting was a science, was akin to psychology, and that a good actor was a psychologist.
A leading proponent of the Expressionist movement was one of Berlin's most controversial playwrights, Bertolt Brecht. After auditioning Lorre for a play, Brecht praised the young actor's distinctive looks and intense style. He offered Lorre the chance to play more complex characters in more substantial roles. In 1929, Lorre captivated theatergoers in a Brecht-directed social drama called Pioniere in Ingolstadt. One critic described him as a new face, a terrifying face. At 25, Peter Lorre had become a celebrity, one who was widely admired by his fellow actors. One such admirer was actress Celia Lovsky.
She saw him eating at a restaurant. She sat down with him and complimented him on his performance. He walked her home, and on the way home, he told her that he loved her, and she laughed in his face, and which prompted him to scream back, "Untier," or monster, which thereafter became his affectionate name for her for the rest of his life.
The two became inseparable and soon moved in together. But Peter's relative happiness was short-lived.
He had a major operation that went wrong in Switzerland for some unknown reason. Now, it could have been an appendix, it could have been a gallbladder, I'm not sure, but obviously there was an infection and they actually didn't expect him to live. And for about 3 or 4 days it was touch and go, and they started giving him morphine, which was the usual habit in those days.
Although still in pain, and despite a growing dependency on morphine, Lorre returned to work. Once again, his intense performances drew the attention of other artists. Among them was Germany's leading filmmaker, Fritz Lang, who, after seeing his work, cast him as the lead in his next film. In M, Lorre played a pathological child murderer, one whose crimes are so repellent that Berlin's criminal underworld agrees to help track him down. In the film's climactic scene, he pleads with a kangaroo court for his life.
Du willst also damit sagen, dass du morden musst? Immer muss ich durch Straßen gehen und immer spüre ich, da ist einer hinter mir her. Das bin ich selber und verfolgt mich.
I thought he was one of the greatest actors I'd ever seen because he portrayed this man who was a child molester and murderer, and yet he became very sympathetic, and you were sorry for him. And he captured the quality of a man who was a tortured soul.
Uncle.
He succeeded, perhaps not consciously, in creating a portrait of the ordinariness of evil in pre-Nazi Germany. There's just there's nothing melodramatic about Lorre's characters. He's absolutely ordinary. He fits in everywhere, and yet he is the carrier of a tremendous evil.
The international press hailed Lorre as the world's greatest actor, and the intensity of his horrifying performance had made him a star. But just ahead were real-life horrors that would change the 27-year-old actor's life and the world forever. By 1933, Adolf Hitler and the Nazi Party had gained control of Germany and began the systematic and deliberate destruction of anything and anyone perceived to be in their way. In addition to Jews, Hitler's enemies included academics, liberals, and artists, those who had frustrated his own creative ambitions. The Expressionist movement was discredited as promoting decadence and obscenity. Many actors, playwrights, and philosophers were being imprisoned and executed. Others, like Peter Lorre, were too well known and were simply told to leave.
It was actually Goebbels, who later became the propaganda minister, who in those days was very much interested in theatre, and artists generally considered himself as their protector, so to speak, and he apparently was the one who warned Peter to get out.
Fleeing Germany in the spring of 1933, Peter and Celia settled in Paris. But despite his prior success, the actor had difficulty getting work. After a frustrating year with only one cameo appearance, he got a call from a British director who requested a meeting in London. The director was Alfred Hitchcock.
He was terrified because he knew just a smattering of English, which he had used in his job as a bank teller. Well, he knew that Hitchcock loved to tell stories, so he let Hitchcock become a raconteur, and he simply reacted with laughter. And Hitchcock got the idea that he understood, was following the story, and that he obviously spoke English.
Lorre was cast in his first English-speaking role as a sadistic spy in The Man Who Knew Too Much.
And tell Mrs. Lawrence, her little Betty and her husband are very well.
Anything else?
Tell her they may soon be leaving us. Leaving us for a long, long journey. How is it that Shakespeare says? From which no traveler returns.
Lorre later referred to himself as the man who didn't know too much English. He stayed up late night, drinking black coffee, at first parroting his lines, but later learning their meaning and infusing them with nuances that told people that he had a real grasp on the role.
Sorry. Please forgive me.
Lorre's performance was well received, and his career was back on track. Offered a contract at $1,000 a week with Columbia Pictures in Hollywood, Peter eagerly accepted. In July 1934, Peter married Celia and brought his bride to America, the land of his childhood dreams. The warm sunshine and glamorous lifestyle of Hollywood was a welcome change from the dark nightmare that had engulfed Europe. The studios were brimming with creative energy, much of it provided by actors, directors, and technicians who, like Lorre, were fleeing Hitler's reign of terror. But Peter's movie contract was not all it appeared to be. The performances that had made him famous had typed him, and producers were unwilling to cast the star of M in other kinds of roles.
M stamped Lorre's fate. Afterwards, he was inundated with countless offers to play murderers and psychopaths. Women on the street, when they saw him, would clutch their children to their breast and flee from this actor whose portrayal had been just a little too convincing.
After a year of waiting in vain for a part, the desperate actor approached Columbia chief Harry Cohn with the idea of filming Dostoevsky's Crime and Punishment. Cohn agreed with one condition. First, he would be loaned out to MGM to star in Mad Love.
It had everything. It had sadism and necrophilia and mad science and mutilation. It's a story of an obsessed doctor who grafts the hands of a murderer onto a concert pianist who's been maimed in a train wreck. And of course the hands take on a life of their own.
Fresh on the heels of Bela Lugosi's Dracula and Boris Karloff's Frankenstein, filmgoers embraced Lorre as Hollywood's newest horror star. Honoring his promise, Cohn cast Lorre as Raskolnikov in Crime and Punishment. Although Lorre gave what he believed to be one of the best performances of his career, the film was a box office disappointment.
And while it wasn't a bad film, and it was a fairly good adaptation of the Dostoevsky novel, audiences were just not ready to accept Peter as a leading man, unfortunately. And so the picture it was not successful.
After only 2 years and just one film, Lorre left Columbia. At issue was the 32-year-old actor's unwillingness to be typecast in what he felt were one-dimensional horror roles. Signing on at the newly formed 20th Century Fox in 1936, Lorre was cast by studio chief Darryl Zanuck as an undercover spy in Crack Up.
You know, a man sees nothing because he's wise, or afraid, or stupid. Which are you?
Wise as an owl.
An owl? You know, an owl in daytime, she can't see, like this. And in nighttime, she can.
His performance as a ruthless spy posing as a harmless eccentric gave the actor the chance to play both comedy and drama, a challenge he welcomed. A similar challenge was provided when the Hungarian actor appeared as the Japanese detective Mr. Moto in Fox's follow-up to their enormously successful Charlie Chan series.
Look out!
Why, it's Moto. Are you hurt?
No, thank you. Only a slight mishap.
Gee, I thought sure we were going to kill somebody.
Mr. Moto is a very difficult fellow to kill.
The film was an instant hit, and in less than 2 years, Lorre would appear in 8 more Mr. Moto films.
What happened? Mr. Wong is quite dead.
When Lorre later spoke of the Mr. Moto series, he said, "I ran away from home to become an actor, not to become Mr. Moto." On the other hand, it gave him great exposure to American audiences. He became a household word. He had to balance those things.
Between films, Lorre occupied himself by reading voraciously. He educated himself about art, science, and philosophy. But the actor's appetite was not limited to intellectual pursuits.
Leon Ames, who was a co-worker on the Mr. Moto series, said that Peter was on the make for every woman on the lot. And that his typical line was, he'd sidle up to a woman and say, "Do you think you could get used to my body?"
Despite his success as Mr. Moto, the actor became frustrated and depressed over what he perceived to be the repetitive and inconsequential nature of his films. More and more, the actor turned to morphine as a means of numbing his emotional pain.
Lorre never hid his drug use from his friends and family, but he did a terrific job of keeping it from his co-workers, because they'll tell you how precise and how professional he was. How he did this with this intermittent drug problem is probably the greatest testament to his acting ability.
I suppose you've got a good reason for sticking your nose into this.
Oh, yes, sir, a very good reason. Mr. Riggs and I have promised the district attorney to arrest the murderer.
Compounding Lorre's emotional deterioration and professional dissatisfaction were growing concerns about the war in Eastern Europe.
Lorre hit a real low point during the making of the Moto pictures. He was sitting in his dressing room and listened to Hitler rant and rave on the radio against the Jews. And one morning, Norman Foster knocked on his door and said, "Peter, we're ready to shoot." And Peter screamed, "The whole world's falling apart, and you want me to make a picture."
Safe in the comfort and luxury of Hollywood, Lorre felt he had abandoned his family in Europe. To assuage his guilt, he participated in the war effort by any means possible.
Peter was making anti-Nazi speeches over the shortwave radio. Somehow the Gestapo managed to track down my family, and my grandfather was dragged up to the Gestapo and was interrogated, but because of his age, even then, I think they finally released him. My aunt was dragged off ostensibly to one of the camps, but she was very sick, and they threw her off the train and left to die at the side of the road. It was a pretty horrific time for us.
Feeling isolated from his family and his country, Lorre was ever more insistent on playing better characters in stronger films. At times, Zanuck complied.
Service. Garçon, service, please.
I thought I told you to stay out of here.
Oh, yes, monsieur, but I wish to order a very expensive breakfast.
You do, huh? And what would you like?
Oh, some wine ordinaire and for 1,000 francs, lobsters with thermidor.
In I'll Give a Million, Lorre's naive hobo was hailed by the press as a superbly comic performance. But despite positive reviews, moviegoers wanted more of their beloved Mr. Moto.
You really are Moto, then?
That is my one permanent characteristic.
Frustrated by what he perceived as Zanuck's failure to acknowledge his diverse talents, in July of 1939, the actor obtained a release from Fox, leaving Mr. Moto behind. At 35, he was, once again, unemployed and on his own. In 1940, Peter Lorre gave in to Hollywood typecasting and appeared alongside Bela Lugosi and Boris Karloff in the critically disappointing comedy thriller You'll Find Out. Small roles in obscure films followed. But the 35-year-old actor, who had previously proven his range and stature, was about to receive a badly needed career boost.
We were talking about a lot more money than this. There are more of us to be taken care of now. Well, that may be, but I've got the Falcon.
You may have the Falcon, but we certainly have you.
As the obsequious scoundrel Joel Cairo in John Huston's film of the Maltese Falcon, Lorre received universal praise, and the film became a box-office blockbuster. So potent, in fact, was the chemistry of Lorre, Bogart, and screen-heavy Sidney Greenstreet that the trio were quickly reteamed in the now classic Casablanca.
I was willing to shoot Captain Reno, and I'm willing to shoot you. All right, Major, you asked for it.
What do you want for Sam?
I don't buy and sell human beings.
That's too bad. That's Casablanca's leading commodity.
Rick, help me.
Be a fool, you can't get away.
Rick, hide me. Do something. You must help me, Rick.
Now under contract at Warner Brothers, Lorre was again making quality films and working steadily. Often paired with Greenstreet or Bogart, he enjoyed the kind of professional camaraderie he had not experienced since leaving Germany.
They liked each other very much, but they became very good friends, you know. Peter was very easy to like. He was a charming guy. And Bogart, Bogey was a very, very intelligent guy, too.
When Bogart considered marrying a woman, I think 22 or 3 years his junior, he was very concerned and came to Lorre for advice. And Lorre counseled him, it's better to have 5, 10, 15 years, happy years, than none at all.
For Peter and his wife Celia, the happiness of their 10-year marriage was behind them. They had gone from being lovers to friends. While filming all through the night, Lorre met and became smitten with his younger co-star, a German actress named Karen Verne.
I noticed that he would begin to dress up a little better, you know, and I knew that they would go away for a weekend, and he was very nicely dressed. Yeah, he sort of seemed to, I think he was trying to win her affections.
On May 25th, 1945, 2 months after his divorce from Celia, Peter and Karen were married. To keep pace with his younger and more athletic wife, the 41-year-old took up tennis and soon became lean and muscular. For now he was happy, and his good spirits made him famous for playing practical jokes on his Warner Brothers co-stars.
I'll never forget, one day Judith Anderson came to me and said, "What goes on? Every time Peter leaves my dressing room, there's a big laugh from everybody." And I went over to watch it once to see what was going on. He would come out of her dressing room where he'd been visiting her, and he'd zip up his fly. And of course, nothing was happening, you know, but he just did that for fun. And when she found out about it, she ran after him with a hairbrush.
He used to love to bug Errol Flynn. He'd go to wardrobe and put on these incredible costumes. Say he'd wear the Mutiny on the Bounty Charles Lawton costume. And right in the middle of a take on Errol's set, as Errol would be speaking, he would let out, "Here we go, mutiny," or something like that. And Errol would say, "Oh, God, it's Lorre again. Will you get him off the stage?" And I have a feeling that he was just, we felt that one day he would give anything to be able to be at least some kind of a leading man in one part or another.
Despite the lack of offers for leading roles, Lorre appeared in more than 24 films over the next 3 years. He was making good money and living well. But ironically, the end of World War II meant the end of the kinds of roles in which Lorre specialized. Westerns and comedies soon replaced mysteries and thrillers. Within a year, he was back to playing the kind of one-dimensional boogeyman he despised.
I heard what they said in the garden. I couldn't help but hear.
It's a lie. You're lying.
I'm not a liar. But you are a coward. You don't want to hear the truth.
The glory days at Warner's had ended. Instead of co-starring with Humphrey Bogart, Lorre played opposite a disembodied hand. But as always, Peter remained a professional.
I've never seen a more serious actor. He was always prompt, always knew exactly every word that he felt was right. He often had great suggestions because he was so talented. The director would immediately accept. But he knew everything, his lines, his character, the depth of everything that he did was a very serious thing when that camera rolled.
Hillary, listen, listen. Can you hear it? The piano. It's the hand playing. It's the hand. You were right all the time. It was Ingram's hand that committed murder.
The Beast with 5 Fingers was Lorre's last film with Warner Brothers. In 1946, after 16 films in 5 years, his option was not renewed.
And around this time, Sam Stiefel, a business manager who also represented Mickey Rooney, convinced him that if he went independent, he would make more money and could produce, direct, act in his own films. Well, this appealed to Lorre to finally take charge of his career and directed away from typecasting roles.
Peter formed his own company, Lorre Incorporated. But like many actors of his day, he was not a savvy businessman. Eager to get on with finding interesting projects, he gave Stiefel complete control over his legal and business affairs.
May I help you with your overcoat? Oh, pardon, monsieur, your collar.
Yeah, I'm roughing it.
Here we are.
Thanks, Cuddles.
Very amusing.
From the beginning, business was bad, and lofty aspirations soon gave way to financial necessity, as Lorre was forced to accept the few film roles he was offered. Fortunately, films were not the actor's only creative outlet. Radio mysteries were thriving, and Lorre's unique and expressive voice placed him in great demand.
The way you talk, anybody think you don't even like the poor
Like
cat.
it, huh? Like it. I hate it. I tell you, I hate it. I hate it. I hate it!
He threw himself into performances as if he were giving live performances before a camera or before hundreds of people. At one particular speech, he became so wrapped up in the characterization and the plot that his false teeth flew out. He caught them in midair, put them back in, and kept right on going without a break.
Take the dirty hands off. Take your hands off. I want. Did you hear me?
I don't like to be pushed around. I just don't...
Unfortunately, Peter's experience with Lorre Incorporated was not so stimulating. His constant struggle to find quality material seemed even more fruitless when he discovered that his company had been badly mismanaged.
One day at lunch, it was kind of sad, but I was happy that he thought enough of me to say something about it. And he said, "Barbara, whatever you do, if you stay in this business and you make a success of it, don't let anyone else sign your checks. And I said, no, I don't think I would do that. He said, you say that now. You get busy and you're going to hand it to someone and have them take care of it. And he said, I shouldn't have to be working now. He said, but I have to because I was wiped out.
In May 1949, the 44-year-old actor filed for bankruptcy. After only 3 years, his attempt at independence had failed miserably. Broke and bitter, he decided to leave Hollywood and return to Europe. But what he would find there was not the homeland he had left 15 years before. In June of 1949, Peter and his wife Karen flew to England, where he was to give live readings of poetry and literature. But 4 years of professional and financial problems had seriously damaged the Lorres' already difficult marriage. Within weeks of arriving in London, Karen decided to go home to California. Peter continued to Germany alone. Gone was the bohemian Berlin of Lorre's youth. In its place were bombed-out buildings and refugee camps. Here Lorre saw the destruction of the human spirit reflected in the eyes of the survivors. Overwhelmed by their plight and his own private pain, he again sought refuge in morphine. Checking himself into a German sanitarium, the now divorced actor met a fellow patient named Anne-Marie Brenning. Despite their 18-year age difference, the two began a serious relationship. In 1950, Lorre resolved to make a film addressing Germany's post-war plight. Bolstered by Anne-Marie's emotional support, he decided to write, produce, direct, and star in Der Verlorene, or The Lost One. But the ambitious production was plagued with problems. The original cut of the film was lost in a fire, and Lorre was forced to re-edit the entire project. Also unanticipated was the German reaction to the film. After experiencing the war firsthand, audiences weren't interested in a Hollywood star's rehashing of their grim story. By the time it was released in September 1951, what small response the project received ranged from apathy to hostility. Peter took the rejection badly, believing that his own countrymen were condemning him and his masterpiece. Now broke and with no prospects, in 1952 the 47-year-old Lorre returned to America. It didn't help that Anne-Marie was pregnant and had decided to remain in Germany. Depressed and dejected, the actor spent nearly a year without work until he received a call from an old friend.
John Huston knew where Lorre had been, that he had nowhere to go, and he stepped in and saved him by casting him as a rogue, a comic figure in Beat the Devil.
A child, 6 years old, is older in his heart than you'll be at 60.
It smokes, it drinks, it philosophizes. At this rate, I'll be 60 before you get to the point.
For Lorre, this meant more than he could ever say. It was a chance to be together with Bogart again, and with Huston, and to turn the clock back to happier days, to the times of camaraderie and practical jokes and real nuts and bolt professionalism.
For those who hadn't seen him since his last Hollywood film, the harsh toll Lorre's hardships had taken was jarring.
I was shocked to see how he had deteriorated physically. He was bloated and big stomach out to here, and he had gone very much downhill. And it was very sad because he was a great talent.
What's our wide-eyed Irish leprechaun doing outside my door?
Why do you always make jokes about my name, huh? In Chile, the name of O'Hara is a tip-top name. Many Germans in Chile have become to be called O'Hara.
Completing the film, he flew back to Germany to meet his baby daughter, Catherine. He and Anne-Marie were married on July 21st, 1953. For now, his future looked hopeful.
He was very, very pleased and very happy. He was absolutely besotted with her. And she looked like him. Her temperament was very much like him. She was also very creative and very artistic.
Later that summer, Peter moved his family to Beverly Hills, where new challenges were offered him in the rapidly developing medium of television. Here, the stage-trained actor could enjoy a broader range of roles.
Look, Mr. Bond, as you should know by now, I'm quite without mercy, and if you continue to be that obstinate, I'll have to torture you. You'll be tortured to the edge of madness. Believe me, you have no hope whatsoever, you hear? None. Nor has she.
You're an ugly little man. Why don't you stop talking?
As the very first James Bond supervillain in a televised adaptation of Ian Fleming's Casino Royale, Peter Lorre brought an intensity and perversity unusual for the time.
Very lucky, Mr. Bond.
Yes.
And very handsome. Tell me, has he changed much since the days when you two were...
He looks just the same.
Uh-huh.
You want me to talk with him now?
Plenty of time. I'll tell you when.
During his latter years, Lorre often referred to film and television work that he didn't want to do as latrine duty, which was really unfair, because many of Lorre's film roles at this time for dramas such as Playhouse 90 and Climax gave him far more substantive parts than the filmmakers were ever doing, larger and more substantive.
Unlike his TV appearances, Lorre's film roles were mostly limited to parodies of his earlier screen persona.
Sure, we're friends. Go ahead. Hit me.
Hmm?
Hit me.
You mean that?
Sure, go ahead. You can't miss it.
Now we are friends.
The former star of Germany's expressionist movement had become a caricature. The man who had terrified adult audiences in M and Mad Love was now delighting children in The Story of Mankind and 5 Weeks in a Balloon.
Climb aboard and enjoy the wildest, wackiest air safari of all time.
I think what happened to Peter, the sad thing that happened to Peter was that he began to mock himself in a way. And I think he gave up trying to do serious work as an actor. And he saw Hollywood as a place to make money. And as he often said to me, make faces.
You are there with a cast as exciting as the wonders they encountered. Walter Pidgeon, Joan Fontaine, Peter Lorre, Barbara Eden.
Kathy.
Commodore, where's Lee?
Come on. We have no time to lose. We must find him.
He was indomitable. He never seemed sad or resigned. He did not demean what he was working on at the moment, ever. It is to his credit that he didn't let it get in his way.
In 1962, Lorre appeared in the first of a series of modestly budgeted horror comedies.
True terror is the soft, cold caress of the raven's wing.
Directed by Roger Corman, these loosely based adaptations of Edgar Allan Poe's stories co-starred veteran shockmasters Boris Karloff, Basil Rathbone, and Vincent Price. Playing his roles with more mirth than menace, Peter Lorre enjoyed his work for the first time in many years.
He became very active from relatively very little business, so to speak. He was making movies right and left and being paid for them, and he loved to work. He loved to make the movies. He loved the money.
Lorre looked on these as a time to have fun, to escape, and basically to earn some much-needed money for his daughter, because obviously Lorre anticipated that he wouldn't live that much longer. His health was very, very poor.
He was sick at the time, very sick. But the moment the camera started to roll, there was no sign of being ill. And I did feel that he was enjoying every moment of playing comedy. I felt it was like, oh, another window had opened up for him, you know. And he did. That was a joyous thing. The whole film was a joy for him.
Critics praised the on-screen chemistry of Filmland's most famous monsters. After years of personal and professional disappointment, it appeared that Peter Lorre could finally enjoy a secure and happy future. But once again, fate had a different plan.
Starring Vincent Price, who, inspired by a seductive woman, is overpowered with lust to kill. Peter Lorre, too sensitive for both the life he lives and the lives he takes.
Butterfingers.
Now in his late 50s, Peter Lorre was making one film a year. On the set, his love of acting kept him motivated. But off the set, he fought chronic fatigue, weakness, and depression. Problems at home added to his unhappiness.
His marriage to Anna Marie was not a happy one. She grated on his nerves. When she went to restaurants, she announced herself as Mrs. Peter Lorre to secure the best table, and made a production of the fact that she was the wife of a celebrity. And Peter at this time preferred to keep a very low key and not advertise his presence.
Ironically, the actor got along much better with his two ex-wives. He called second wife Karen often and saw his first wife Celia almost daily.
I would always have thought that Celia was a second mother to him, and I think that Celia was the person who stood by him, and being the older figure, being a very down-to-earth sort of person and a very kind person.
In 1962, Peter and Anne-Marie decided to end their 12-year relationship.
The lovable, gullible innocent who becomes the mark for 6 wily characters in search of their bread and butter.
If Lorre had been critical of his earlier Hollywood films, he was downright hostile toward The Patsy, in which he appeared with Jerry Lewis.
He didn't want to be in the film. He walked through the role. He complained to coworkers, which was unusual to him. Usually he closeted his regrets about whatever film he was doing. In this case, he was more outspoken, and Kathy Lorre, his daughter, felt that this film had a hand in killing him because he was so unhappy about it. He said, "I don't want to see it when it comes out."
On March 23, 1964, just 4 days after completing The Patsy, Peter Lorre died of a heart attack. He was 59 years old. After a 34-year career that included 79 films and dozens of theatrical, radio, and television performances, Lorre's death meant the loss of a gifted and generous artist and the passing of one of the screen's true originals.
Tragic, his career, I think. In the end, just tragic. It shouldn't have been that way. In a different world, in a different society, we would have had greater appreciation of his talent and his ability.
It never ceases to amaze me that to this day he is still remembered. There was something about him on film, this sort of creative spirit.
I think of Peter Lorre as warm, giggling, mischievous, a fabulous actor to work with.
Peter Lorre's legacy is perhaps best demonstrated by the fact that people who've never seen one of his films know who he is. They know what that voice is. They know what that voice means. They know what he looks like.
I miss him terribly. Oh. And there's no one else like him. There are many people that can be replaced in this town, but nobody can replace Peter.